Good morning and welcome to the Community Center Investment Program Application webinar. I'm Melissa Latham, Director of Communications and Policy at CDFA. Thank you very much for those of you who are joining us again today. We anticipate that this presentation, including time for questions, will run from now until about 11:30. So today we're really focused on briefly revisiting the priorities of the Community Center Investment Program and then jumping right into the application, as well as some presentation around the evaluation of thresholds and the scoring criteria. And then we'll provide some next steps for you to consider should an application sound like it's a good opportunity for you and your organization. So we are recording today's session and we will share it along with the presentation slides and links to relevant resources following the program. If you have questions, please post them in the Q&A box. We will be monitoring that throughout and pausing to answer questions. So again, please use that Q&A box so that we can best monitor and help answer all the questions that you may have regarding the program. And without further ado, I will introduce Rebecca Bover, the Director of Community Development and Manager of this program, to dive right in.
Thank you, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rebecca. I am the Director of Community Development and oversee the Community Center Investment Program. And I'm really thrilled to have you all joining us this morning as you consider an application to our Community Center Investment Program. So just as a quick review, I'm just going to, I know for some of you, this is probably a repeat if you joined us on Tuesday, but I just want to get into a quick program overview. So through this is a highly competitive program, and we're focusing the Community Center Investment Program resources on projects that will help rehabilitate, expand, or build community centers that will be managed by municipalities and nonprofits with limited resources and a demonstrated need to invest in their physical infrastructure to be viable for decades to come. Awards will be made to advance community projects that show a high degree of community support, build partnerships, and leverage other resources. So now moving into the application, which I know you're all waiting to hear. So first thing, your application to our program must be submitted through CDFA's grant management system. Everyone working on an application must register by completing a form. This will become your organization's profile information and includes your contact information as well as information about your organization. And your profile will be used for all grant communication. So please make sure this information is accurate and up to date. I'll go through this again briefly later, but right now I want you just to be clear that you need to list your primary contact, and that should be the person from the organization or municipality that will have firsthand knowledge of the project and has authority to provide information and provide status reports for your organization. This person should not be a grant writer unless the person writing the grant is from the organization and will continue to be involved if the organization or municipality is awarded. There should not be any personal information within the application, like using a home address or a telephone number. Everything should be your organization's information. Any changes of the primary contact need to be communicated to us and updated in our GMS immediately to prevent any delay in communication. It's extremely important. The next important person that you need to identify is your authorized official, which is the person who can legally enter your organization into a contract. So if the applicant is an organization, this person can be the same as the primary contact. However, if it is a municipality, it should be an authorized official from the municipality. This person will also need their own grant management system or GMS account in order to electronically sign the contract. And any changes of the authorized official also need to be communicated to us and updated in GMS immediately to prevent any delays in communication. For those of organizations or municipalities who will be using a grant writer, we do need your grant writer to register separately and under their business. They must submit a GMS authorization form to be associated with the applicant organization, and they will be added to your project as an additional contact on the application. The authorization form can be found in the funding will be found under our attachments. If you need help registering, GMS registration instructions are available on our resource hub. And if once complete, CDFA will be notified of your registration and will review and approve within 2 business days. You will then receive an email from GMS with your user ID and password, which you can change after you log in under the My Profile on the main menu page. Once registered, then you can begin the process of completing your application, and you should select the Community Center Investment Program as the funding opportunity to which you are applying. Now, that's a lot of information, but really important information for the purposes of applying to our program. So now I'm just going to run through the application, each section one at a time. So we'll start with applicant information, eligibility, funding request, project and readiness information. Then we'll dive into project finance, the project budget, and finally certification. So the first section that you'll come to in your application is the applicant information. Again, important people that must be listed in the applicant information section are your primary contact, which we just discussed, and your authorized official. And again, just to reiterate, the grant writer will be listed under your additional contacts unless your grant writer and your primary contact are one and the same. In addition to that information, you'll need to include all of your organization information and also identify which executive council district you're located in. Okay. The next section is the eligibility section. You will need to identify if you're a nonprofit organization or a municipal government. Attachments will be required. This is backup documentation to confirm your eligibility. You will not be allowed to complete this section without those attachments, which include your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, your IRS determination letter, certificate of good standing, your UEID number, and your SAM.gov registration. If for some reason you think you're eligible, but one or more of these attachments are not applicable to your organization, please just contact us and let us know, and we'll work through that with you.
Becky, if we could just pause to answer a couple questions right up front to confirm for folks that organizations can apply directly. So you don't need to use a grant writer necessarily, but you can use a grant writer. And both organizations, nonprofit organizations and municipalities are eligible applicants and can apply directly in our grants management system. And then a question around authorized official. Curious as to whether an authorized official would be a town administrator or a member of the Board of Selectmen. And I'd say that's probably pretty specific to your town or city or town. So if your town administrator is authorized to apply for grants, then yes, that would be your authorized official. If it's the Board of Selectmen that needs to, sign off on those things, then it would be your Board of Selectmen would be the authorized official. So really it's based on your local governance structure would dictate that. And then just also confirming that those who registered in the first round to apply would still be in our grants management system, and that login information would not have changed since your original registration. So those are some questions coming up, and
questions.
We'll keep going. Thanks,
Okay.
Beck.
So we'll move on to the request section. This is the third part of your application. So you'll have to put in what your actual funding request is, your total project costs, and then that's where you will need to decide if you are requesting your award in the form of a forgivable loan or a grant. If a grant is requested, you will also need to complete a Community Center Investment Program risk assessment for structure of award, as well as a compliance plan. So moving on to the differences between the two. So the Community Center Investment Program funds are issued on a reimbursement basis for eligible costs, whether you receive your award as a loan or a grant. The forgivable loan is a forgivable loan at 0% interest with very limited federal compliance requirements. However, recognizing that does not always work for all applicants, you can apply for a grant or request your award as a grant. But this does have more significant federal compliance requirements and likely to include 2 CFR 200 requirements, as well as program administration, including record retention, financial management, with auditing requirements, environmental evaluations, civil rights, including ADA compliance, procurement, perpetual federal interest in the property, plan for real property reporting, and a disposition plan, labor standards, and an acquisition slash and relocation information. So it's much more, there are many more requirements with the grant than the loan, but that is not to discourage those who need or prefer the grant structure over the loan. The fourth section is our project and readiness information section. This is a substantial section of the application. But first, we do ask for your project name and your project address. We need to know where your project will be located. And then moving on to that, we want you to think about the community benefits. So describing the problem your project will address and it's the impact it will have on your community and the public benefit and purpose. So providing a detailed description of the specific programmatic activities that will take place. Thinking about how you will activate your project plan to implement the programs, who will administer the programs, including staff, volunteers. Please include any community partners that will also be included. And please attach evidence of the programming that will take place. It's not enough to provide just letters of support. We really need you to include a program plan, spreadsheet of confirmed activities, or a program calendar, or an operations plan. And those can be included as attachments separately from your narrative. In the next section, we want you to talk about your outcome measures. So thinking about what are the goals and measurable outcomes of your project, and what is your methodology for tracking them? How will success be measured or evaluated? And we want you to think about both quantitative and qualitative measures. But we will specifically ask for you to report on the total number of people who are anticipated to be served annually in your center, the total number of people from your priority populations that are anticipated to be served annually, as well as the square feet of commercial or community facility space that was developed. And we want you to think how this project will be a success within your community, and be realistic about the outcomes and project goals that you have in mind, as you will be required to report on these quarterly. So regarding project readiness information, thinking about your public access. So how will your project ensure the facility and programs are open and accessible? How does your project help to build a sense of place and community? How does the project fit within the community's broader strategy or plan? And then thinking about community building and placemaking. How will you engage the community in the long-term use of the center? What outreach have you done to ensure you're reaching your intended audience? Now moving on to your project, the project support piece. So here we're looking for you to think about your community needs assessment. Describe the community needs that your project will specifically address. What constituencies will this project benefit? How does the project fit within the community's broader strategy or plan? Does your project serve a specific priority population, such as those disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic as defined by the US Treasury? And thinking about how does it impact those folks? And placemaking and belonging. How does your project build a sense of place and community? How will you ensure that the project is accessible and open to the general public? And thinking about how your project might help revitalize socioeconomically challenged areas, and really why is your project relevant to your community? Within that section, there's an opportunity to provide attachments. Some are, determined if it's applicable to your program. Others are required. But running down this list, we are looking for photos or renderings of your project property, a map of your project location, evidence of planning and zoning approvals, evidence of your site control, independent appraisals, your asset management plan, construction or implementation schedule, letters, news articles, historical information if it's applicable, and your energy efficiency, clean energy documentation. In addition to that, if it's applicable, so if you're a municipality applying, we would look for your municipal plan. We do ask that within that plan, you clarify with a link to your specific project, or denote where in the plan it's actually speaking to the project that you're applying for. And also, as I mentioned before, you can include an operations plan or a program calendar, a spreadsheet of proposed programmatic activities, and then memorandums of agreement if it's applicable. So for project readiness, additional project readiness information, we also need your property description. If your property involves the acquisition, construction, or renovation of real estate, we need you to describe the property, its ownership structure, and the status of the site control. We need you to list any mortgages or deed restrictions that are on the property. If this property is new construction, you will need to complete the required community center investment program new facility analysis, and additional information can be found regarding that in the program FAQs that are on our resource hub. Regarding project capacity and readiness for implementation, we want you to think about your project timeline and readiness. So when will the project begin? When will it be complete? We need you to include key tasks, estimated completion dates, and who is responsible for completing those tasks. If your project includes construction, you need to discuss the status of your architectural and engineering plans and cost estimates. What permits, approvals, agreements, or other requirements are necessary to complete the project? Have they been secured? And if not, you need to describe your strategy or timeline for securing them. And then we need you to think about or include information about your the energy policy guidelines that you'll be asked to adhere to. So you'll need to indicate how your project plans to meet the applicable requirements from the energy policy. If you have completed an energy audit, it's not required, but if you have that information, or whether you've completed an energy design charrette in the past 3 years, we do ask that you briefly describe any communication that you might have had with relevant utilities regarding potential energy incentives, and indicate if your project plans to meet any of the recommendations from the energy policy. Now I'm going to introduce Chris Monroe, Senior Community Development Manager, and he's going to run through the financial and certification requirements of the application.
And Becky, before he jumps in there, I might have Chris maybe talk a little bit more about the forgivable loan and grant structure. And Chris, if it's helpful, I can go back to that slide. Is that useful?
Sure, that would be helpful.
Okay, great.
And I can kind of start talking about that. So originally the structure was kind of designed as a forgivable loan, as advised by Gopher, the governor's office. I forget the acronym for economic relief and recovery, I think, something along those lines. And it was structured in that way to allow for the most flexibility related to federal requirements under 2 CFR 200 and applicability of things like procurement and environmental review and other things like that. And a grant option was developed because some municipalities weren't able to go through in case they weren't able to get the loan product. So basically they would have to go to town meeting and have to cover the potential debt service on that loan. And so that's why we created a grant option. So the primary differences are, as you can see here, with the grant, there's additional federal requirements related to compliance that come into play. As I mentioned, procurement, environmental, some labor standards, some acquisition standards, things like that. With the loan, those are not in place. And the structure of the loan is at the completion of the construction or the project. So once the closeout's completed, the reporting is completed, and your facility is up and running and impacting the beneficiaries, At that point, you satisfied the requirements of the loan, and the loan is forgiven. There's no repayment needed on that. With the grant, it's similar in that as long as you maintain the property and maintain annual reporting on the property, and it's being used as designed in the project design and implementation, then that grant doesn't need to be repaid. So that's kind of the basic overview. I'm happy to answer any additional questions on that, but there is more information in our application and program guide too, related to the differences.
Absolutely. And I think you just underscored something that's really important, is that's why it's so critical that the projects are completed within the deadlines that are outlined, because that is when the loan becomes forgivable. So that completion is really, that readiness and completion is really critical to having that forgivable loan option. Is that accurate, Chris?
Yes.
Okay, super. All right, I'm gonna move us back to your slides, and you can kick us off on financials.
Will do. All right.
There we go.
Okay. It's a moving target. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the finance and implementation capacity, funding, and other financial sort of considerations or requirements for this grant. So basically related to project funding, why does your project need the requested funding? So, what is your current financial state? Why do you need the funds to complete this project? Do you have other sources of financing committed? What other sources are you pursuing if you haven't? And what is the status of those sources of funding, whether that's other grants or loans or operating reserves or endowments that are set aside specifically for this project? And how will you meet the 15% minimum match requirement? Other public-private investments, has your organization received or administered grant funds or loans from other sources in the past 5 years? If so, please describe. So that would be helpful to know if your organization is familiar with the process, if you have done any reporting in the past or have met certain requirements for grants or loan funds. That's also something to consider in the application. And then with project implementation, describe your organization's current staff and capacity to carry out the implementation of your proposed project and what their responsibilities will be. And that can be done briefly in the narrative if you have an organizational chart or a spreadsheet of directors or volunteers, employees, and kind of the and their roles in managing this project or developing this project. That would also be helpful to know because we're looking at capacity. So, there's obviously various components of meeting requirements either with the loan or the grant and kind of going through the application and providing additional information. So we want to make sure that there's a core group of people who are able to do that. Right. And then for the next section in finance and implementation capacity, we're looking for attachments here to support the narrative. So whether that's a list or a link to your board of directors, depending on the structure of your organization, other funding and the 15% required match. So your status of non-community center investment plan funding sources, and you need to show evidence of at least 15% match to meet that threshold. And that can be in the form of letters of agreement from committed funding sources with their contact information, loan terms, equity agreements, other details. Could be pledges from a capital campaign or things like that. Planning and or feasibility study performed for this project if applicable. So if you've done any sort of preliminary design work or anything like that or permitting, we'd want to see that information as well. And then digging in a little bit more in the finance and implementation capacity. So every applicant must submit several financial documents. We need to know the start and end dates of your organization's fiscal year. Some use a calendar year, others go from July 1st through June 30th of the following calendar year. Others have different dates, and this helps us understand your financial situation and the context for the other financial documents. Each organization requesting funds submits several operating budgets for the entire organization, so not just for the specific project, but for the overall organization. And those include the annual operating budget for the current fiscal year and a budget to actual report for the most recent completed fiscal year, showing what you budgeted for major income and expense categories and the actual performance of those categories. And if you have a proposed operating budget for your next year, that would be helpful to include as well. Every nonprofit organization with an annual operating budget greater than $25,000 must submit an annual report to the Secretary of State's office. That annual report must include a financial statement. There are other different types of financial statements that the state requires depending on the size of your organization. And our requirements are the same as the Secretary of State, so we defer to their requirements. If your organization has an annual operating budget of more than $1 million, submit your audited financial statement. This is a statement that's independently prepared by an outside CPA or audit firm. And if your organization has an annual operating budget of $500,000 to $1 million, it requires a reviewed financial statement by a third party. And if your organization has an annual operating budget of less than $500,000 and you do not have an independently prepared financial statement, you submit your form 990 for your most recent completed fiscal year. And we also require management prepared financial statements too for the current fiscal year to show that you're operating correctly. So there are other pieces to the financial puzzle related to your operating reserve, endowment, line of credit, or other sources of matching funds. A financial status overview is a narrative section of the application that allows you to provide some context behind the numbers. For example, you may have planned a deficit in your operating budget to enable you to invest in a new computer system. So we would just need information on that if there are discrepancies. The three financial tools listed are good indicators of the financial health of an organization and how the board is managing finances for long-term stability and growth. An operating reserve provides a buffer of cash or other liquid assets that could be tapped in special circumstances. An endowment is another tool to generate annual operating revenue. And a line of credit is a great tool to manage cash flow and to establish a positive relationship with a local bank or credit union. And for each of those tools, if you are using them, just tell us which ones that you're using, how you're doing it, and a little bit more information so we can see how you're managing your organization's finances and how that would translate to managing the implementation of this project. So the next section is your project budget, which includes your sources and uses, which we provide a table in our grant management system to fill all that out. A budget narrative, so talking a little bit about key points or if there's any matching funds you want to describe a little bit more. And then a financial document explanation, which we provide a resource for there as well. And for the sources and uses, we're looking for a detailed list of all the sources for funding for the project. So we provide different columns where you can put in a line of credit or a capital campaign that you've received pledges for, or other things like that, and different expense categories, which would show, the CCIP funds would go towards architecture, engineering, or construction, and maybe you have cash reserves that are paying attorney's fees or something like that. So that would be indicated in that budget form. And then related to certification, we kind of went over this previously with your authorized official. There's a section where we require every organization to submit a certification from their authorized official that confirms that all the financial statements are accurate, that your organization is structured and follows New Hampshire state law, conflict of interest laws, things like that. And to acknowledge that all information and documents that you've provided are, to the best of your knowledge, correct, and that you're subject to disclosure and compliance with RSA 91A, which is New Hampshire's right to know law. And with that, it looks like we might have some questions.
We do. So these might be applicable to you, Chris, or Rebecca. So I'll just There's some clarification around the forgivable loan or grant structure. So if we apply for the forgivable loan, are we required to begin paying on the loan immediately upon award? If forgiven, do those payments get refunded to us? And that might just be a great clarification about how the award is structured.
Sure. So no, there won't be any repayments on the loan if you meet the provisions of the loan agreement. So the way that the award structured is a reimbursement kind of structure across both the loan and the grant. So for instance, let's say you have $100,000 construction invoice. You would work with whoever is submitting that what we call a claim or a reimbursement request in our grant management system. You would include information on that, and if it passes our review, we would disperse funds to cover that cost, and you would not have to repay that. So it's sort of acting in that capacity. And then once you've depleted all your funds, if you've met the program requirements and the implementation requirements, then then the loan is forgiven. We'll issue a document to that effect, and you won't have to repay those funds.
So in essence, it kind of acts like a grant during our time together, but the contract is in the form of a forgivable loan and ultimately, is forgiven. So another clarification, if the project, and I'm not sure we've actually addressed this one, but if the project is not completed by the loan forgiveness deadline, what are the terms of the loan, including payment schedule? Does the loan remain eligible for partial forgiveness?
We'd have to double check. So there are provisions in the loan agreement that would, either regarding default or repayment, we would have to go back and take a look at those for more specific information.
Can a town with town meeting apply for the forgivable loan, and if awarded, be conditionally awarded contingent upon approval of the matching funds from the town meeting? And I believe the answer to that is yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, that is absolutely how you can go about that. I know with this next funding round, it's difficult because of the timing of the town meeting schedules. So that is absolutely what you would need to do, or how it would be handled.
Great. We have a couple questions on match and energy, which I think we'll address in the coming slides, but also just want to pause to answer this question about related to kind of like readiness. If it's a town project on town land, do we need an appraisal and planning board approval before we apply? According to RSA, municipal projects do not need planning board approval, just a concept review.
I would think we would defer or default to those standards related to municipal projects.
Perfect. There's some questions about a certificate of good standing, and if you think that those thresholds don't apply to you, that's a great topic to talk about in a pre-application meeting, or reach out specifically to us so we can work through any individual situations related to those thresholds. And then another question, if the project will take more than a year to complete, is it still a project that would qualify? And I think you'll get into those deadlines in a little bit too.
We will. Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay.
I'll pass it back to you, Becky, to
okay.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so we've made it through the application, and I want to talk a little bit about evaluation, and then I'll get into thresholds requirements. So as an applicant, you'll undergo substantial programmatic and financial reviews from all of the information that you've provided in your application, and a project will be considered on its own merits, but also as it compares to the other applicants in the funding round. And the awarded projects from the spring funding round. So just something to keep in mind. The first step in the evaluation process is the applicant must demonstrate that they meet eligibility in each of the threshold requirements, which will be discussed in the next slides. And then if the applicant does demonstrate eligibility and threshold requirements have been met, then the applicant will be further evaluated and scored based on criteria that's outlined within the application and program guide. Projects meeting eligibility requirements must also meet the following conditions, though. You do have to demonstrate in your application that your project is for a public purpose and will have a public benefit, that you meet the that there is financial need for the program funds, and that you have capacity to manage the project as well as readiness. And then your project must comply with all local, state, and federal laws and guidance. Step 3 in the process, so if you're scored, then the project must also be determined by CDFA's Community Development Advisory Committee to fall within the scope of the program as outlined or defined within the application and program guide. So moving on to the thresholds. So there are 5 critical thresholds that each applicant must meet, as I just said, to move on to the scoring. You must meet the definition of a community center by providing multiple types of program activities, which I'll get to in a minute. You have to demonstrate that you have secured matching funds in place, 15% of your project total costs. You must demonstrate readiness for implementation, and that you have a timeline that will enable project completion by August 31st, 2025. So you'll need to be thinking about when your project will begin, when will it be complete, if your project includes construction, what's the status of your permitting approvals. I think we already talked a little bit about this before, and how you'll have to provide that information in your application, but that's really important for us to understand your level of readiness. And then you will have to meet CDFA's energy policy, which we'll get to later in these slides. So moving on to the threshold. So the first threshold, as I mentioned, is that activity piece that's important to your community center. So thinking about the different types of programs that you will have at your center, and recognizing that we are looking for projects that not only have multiple activities that you'll be offering, or multiple programmatic activities, but different types of program activities. So you have to have at least 2 different types of activities that you'll be offering for people to participate in. So the different types, thinking about programs that offer a sense of community, so providing belonging and gathering opportunities, civic programming that help people to engage in community engagement, strengthening participation in local democracy. Maybe it's where your elected officials in your community might meet, and that it's a recognized space for conducting civic business. That's one type of activity you could have. You could have recreational activities, so anything that has a physical element to it is a recreational activity. And then thinking about social services, so that might include programs with a focus on caring for senior citizens or children, food delivery, nutrition support, services for people with disabilities, health or mental health or substance abuse programming, workforce training, health services, and those services that help people who are under or unhoused. So just thinking about the different types of programs that your community center will be offering. And you really need to, as I said before, provide very detailed information on those activities, your primary activities, the secondary activities, that will be a consistent aspect of the established and consistent programming of the community center. So very important threshold to meet. So you will need to have a 15% confirmed match at the time of application, 15% of your total project cost. So matching funds can be in the form of cash, third-party match, grant, or a loan. And yes, CDFA administered funds from the Community Development Block Grant or our tax credit allocations can be used as match, as well as prior project expenses if they were expended after December 21st, 2022. Your match must include costs that are necessary, reasonable, and allowable. And matching funds must be documented in the forms of Letters of agreement from committed funding sources and in-kind matches must be secured by a letter of commitment by the provider of the services and include a valuation of the services, supplies, real property, or equipment. And back to the question, I'll just reiterate that for cities and towns, funds requiring town meeting approval can be non-committed at the time of application. However, you must have evidence that evidence must be provided that you can demonstrate the funding request will be on your March town meeting agenda and that you have strong public support for the proposed project. And just to be clear that staff time, including costs of administration of the community center project or grant writing for the application, can be counted as match, but only if they are not otherwise reimbursed. So you can't include your general payroll expenses as part of your match.
Becky, maybe just
questions?
one clarification, I guess, is so CDFA's technical assistance grant would not count as match because that's reimbursed through our program. Is that accurate?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
Okay. And then a question about the types of activities, like would crafts activities, like what would that count as as far as a bucket? Would that be more community-based?
I think that's more community-based. We do have there is opportunity, these are just like we talk about community, civic, recreational, social services, but we do have an open category. So if you have a program and it doesn't meet those other categories, it can still be in a category all on its own. But I think generally, like art-based activities, I think they would probably fall under our community. We would think of it as a community program.
Great. And some of these questions we will answer along the way. So if I'm not addressing them immediately, it's because we'll likely be talking about them down the line. All right. I'll advance us to the next slide.
So thinking, I mentioned this a little bit before, but a threshold is readiness. So you have to demonstrate that your construction will be underway on your facility within 6 months of the March contract date. We're hoping for early March with that contract date, but you have to demonstrate that you will be underway. And so thinking about what does it mean for construction to be underway, it refers to all the physical components of the project, including demolition, framing, scaffolding, pouring slab, site prep, but it does not include permitting, design, or storing equipment on site or any items that really aren't physically impacting the site. And again, just to be clear, project completion must be done by August 31st, 2025. So it's really important that you think about that deadline as you apply. And accessibility is also a threshold requirement. All projects must be ADA accessible upon completion. This means removing architectural barriers to provide program access in ways that are readily achievable, including, it might be increasing door widths, adding ramps, automated doors, widening hallways, modifying sinks, modifying or improving your facility lighting, and other items that would help improve your general accessibility to your facility and to the programming that you're offering. I know in our there have been questions in the past about what if my building is too old or it just can't be modified that way. So there are accommodations that can be made, but you need to demonstrate that you have a plan in place so that if programming would typically occurs in a part of the building that can't be modified to be ADA accessible, that you can move that programming to a space in the building that is ADA accessible. And you need to demonstrate that you have an actual plan in place to meet those needs. So with that, I'm going to introduce Scott Meslansky. He's the Director of Clean Energy Finance so that he can discuss the threshold energy policy with you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So CDFA aims to ensure that our investments support projects that are working to reduce future operating costs and improve occupant comfort and health and ensure facility durability. So our energy policy supports applicants to identify energy opportunities in their projects and potential funding and financing resources. These requirements apply to all CDFA applications, that will have a change to the physical nature or energy systems in the building. This could be retrofit or new construction. So your completed energy assessment or a clear plan and time frame for completing the requirements of our policy must be included in your application. In some cases, if your project does not impact any kind of energy system, then we do have a waiver process. And I'll quickly go through in the next slide the policy itself. So it is available, this policy, in the application and program guide if you want to look for more detail, and on our resource website. The table here shows the energy policy requirements. The two key requirements highlighted are that the applicant complete a level 2 energy audit or a design charrette, and that you consult with the appropriate utility for potential implementation incentives. We want to make sure you don't leave potential funding on the table, as these funds can help improve the project design and potential future energy savings. We have also a set of recommendations which we encourage you to consider. First, that projects try to incorporate any recommendations from the energy assessment that go beyond the energy code, and incorporate those into their final design or equipment purchases. Second, we encourage high performance construction, and this might follow the guidelines of some of these types of programs, these different certifications, though you don't necessarily need to get certified per se, but that you're moving in that direction. Third, that projects commission any new energy system, and commissioning is where a third party comes in to verify that a system that was installed correctly, and then trains building staff on how to best use and maintain that equipment. There can be a significant amount of potential savings lost without the system commissioning happening. And this depends on the size of the building and the system, of course. The fourth recommendation is that the design team considers transitioning away from fossil fuel systems to high efficiency electric systems. An example would be moving from an oil boiler to an air source heat pump system. This would reduce site pollution, as well as increasing opportunities for renewable energy to support the building's heating and cooling. And the last recommendation here is that projects look into opportunities for solar or other renewable energy systems on site. And again, just reiterating the threshold, as we're discussing thresholds, is that you need to have a plan in place to get your energy assessment done. You could have communication with an energy consultant and communication with the utilities. Please do reach out to me, with questions on that. And there was a question in the chat about, do we need to have the energy audit before the build of the facility or the retrofit? And the answer is typically yes, or else it won't have any impact on the design. However, if you're that far along in your design, that should be a question that we can discuss, separately. But this should happen concurrent with your design. So Katie Easterly Marte will now discuss evaluation and scoring. Thanks.
Can I pause you for a second, Scott, as we got a couple of questions in the chat. So would an outdoor facility with solar lighting need to do the energy assessment?
That would probably, if it's got solar lighting, if it's based on solar, then you can describe that in your narrative and you shouldn't need the assessment there. We can, I'll reach out to you if you would need the waiver form. But if you can describe, another thing to add on top of that is please make sure that you're considering every energy system when you look to, to say that you may not be eligible for the policy.
Great, thank you. And another question, our project is outside in our community park. Is there an energy component that's relevant? Again,
only if you are looking to do a set of lighting, and at that point, if you're just doing lighting, you would need some communication with the utility as to what they would offer for support. And if you're doing something with water systems and you have pumps, if you have any other, then just reach out to me and we can discuss it.
Great. And is there a specific percentage of the grant proposal that ought to be focused on energy or energy specific?
No, projects don't have to have an energy component at all, or they could be, pretty much focused on energy systems in the building and upgrading those. So the range is fine anywhere.
Excellent. And just reiterating that Scott's an awesome resource for you all to consider reaching out to. And we do have grant resources that can help support energy related activities. So yeah, definitely reach out if you have other questions. Thanks so much, Scott.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Now on to Katie.
Great, thank you, team. So as the team described, your application is really going to help you to identify how your project meets those threshold requirements. And if your application satisfactorily meets those threshold criteria, and the capacity and financial assessment meet the minimum standards, then your application will be evaluated and scored. I'm Katie Easterly Marte, the Executive Director of CDFA, and I have the opportunity to walk through that scoring with you. This scoring can all be found in the application and program guide, which if you have not received already following our first webinar, you'll receive after this webinar. And so that application and program guide and really provides you detailed information about how we will score applications. So in brief, the first category is related to community data. So if data is used to establish a community needs score, and that's that first score, which has a maximum of 40 points. The core data index, which is identified in application F of the application program guide, provides the score for your community where your project is located. That score is based on data from a variety of sources. It actually takes 12 different indicators and puts that into that one core data index. Those sources include the U.S. Census Bureau, the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, New Hampshire Housing, and other New Hampshire state departments. So this is all demographic information, 12 different indicators that are brought together to create the core data index. Second is community benefit. As you can see, there's two areas that we're scoring in community benefit for a total of 70 points. The first is needs and impact. Up to 40 points will be awarded to the application showing the greatest need and impact when compared to the other applications in this funding round. The remaining applications shall receive either a substantial, moderate, or minimum score. And those go 30, 10, and 5. Next is the community engagement and building. This is up to 30 points to the degree which an applicant provides evidence of community engagement and building. There are two different 15-point categories in this section. The first is a score 15, 10, or 0 points, depending on how the application shows strong evidence of intentional public engagement within the development, the project planning, and the ongoing programming of the community center. Second is in community building. This is a score of up to 15 points. So for applicants that show strong evidence of community building activities. And we have a definition of community building in the definition section of the application and program guide, and that was reviewed at Tuesday's webinar. Next is in the project support scoring category. And in that scoring category, it's up to 50 points in total. And the first section is the priority populations. So this is up to 15 points for projects that primarily serve a priority population. The priority populations, again, are listed in that application and program guide in the definition section. So you can find those there. And if you are serving a priority population, you're going to want to use your application to show evidence of how you're supporting that priority population. And that will give you up to that 15 points. Next, we're looking at community connections. So we talked a lot about community connections throughout the application. These community centers, we're looking for those that have multiple activities. And so we're scoring up to 15 points for projects which show significant community alignment and connections. The following are ways that you can talk about those connections. Those are applicants that show strong connections to a regional and municipal plan. And we are asking you to upload that regional or municipal plan. There's a attachment line for that. And then in addition to uploading it, you're going to want to tell us where in that plan, because they can be hundreds of pages, where we can find the connection to the proposed project that you are applying for. Secondly, we want to, the up to 15 points will be awarded for applicants that preserve, promote, existing neighborhoods and centers, which revitalize socially, economically challenged areas, and or which preserve and protect historically and culturally valuable structures and sites. So you'll explain that to us in the narrative, how your project meets any of those criteria, and that will be assessed as part of that point section. Next is location and site for up to 10 points. And that's for projects that are geographically diverse. They're in geographically diverse locations across the state in comparison to other applicants, both in the first round and in this application round, really ensuring that we're having geographic diversity in the projects that are funded. Next, we're looking at collaborations for up to 10 points, the last part of the project support section. Collaborations are defined in the definition section, and up to 10 points will be provided for projects that demonstrate strong participation by a partner with the project development or implementation. Projects that are led by partnerships, that are with a priority population are provided additional priority. You need to provide confirmation of these collaborations through attachments of memorandums of agreements, governance structures, or other documentation that can be reviewed as part of the evaluation. Next, the final section is project capacity. Up to 20 points will be provided for readiness of implementation. As you know, there's a readiness threshold. So if you meet that readiness threshold, there's additional up to 20 points for the degree in which your project is ready. Secondly, in terms of energy use. So as Scott really walked through in detail, our energy threshold requirements, but as he said, projects can either adopt none of those requirements, or the project can really be focused on energy. But we are prioritizing in this section up to 20 points if projects meet one of the energy criteria that are listed in this section. So that's promoting projects that meet a LEED passive house or net zero requirement, projects that generate more than 50% of the property's annual energy use with on-site renewable energy, and rehabilitation projects that transition their primary heat from fossil fuel to energy certification. Oh, a couple other criteria: new construction or building rehab projects demonstrate a high level of sustainability in materials or site impact. And for outdoor or non-building projects, we're looking for projects that demonstrate a high level of sustainability in materials or site impact. And you're really going to want to tell us about that in your narrative for that section. So that is the completion of the scoring section. As you can see, the maximum score that can be awarded to a project is 200 points.
Katie, if I could just ask one clarifying question that has come up, is that community data score is predetermined based on the core data index. And that is a combination of a number of socioeconomic and demographic data points that come together in a cumulative score that is that scoring point. So just confirm.
Absolutely, it is. Yep.
Okay. Super, thank you.
But you can find that number if you're curious in exhibit, in one of the exhibits of the application program guide.
Yep, and those prioritize areas of highest need.
Yes, exactly.
Well,
thank you.
Okay, excellent. And then confirmation that the evaluation criteria is the same for both the forgivable loan and grant applications.
Great question. Yes, it is the same.
Excellent. That's all we have on scoring criteria as far as questions go. We have some other clarifying questions that I'm sure we can get to as we move through the other slides.
Okay, and just to speak a little bit, because Becky did mention the Community Development Advisory Committee. So this is peers. These are elected by the governor and council, and they sit on a committee that serves the Community Development Finance Authority and has been active for more than 25 years in review of the community development block grant applications. So they are taking the recommendation from the reviewers following this evaluation where projects are scored, and they're reviewing each of those and finalizing that recommendation. So that's the process, is your application will be reviewed, as we discussed, first for the thresholds. A complete financial and compliance review will be made to ensure that the project can be successful according to the requirements, and then the application will be scored. And likely, if it meets all those first requirements, then the recommendation will be to fund the highest scoring projects with all of the funds that remain in the program. So we encourage you to review the application and program guide and see those scoring criteria, and to bring up any specific questions to your project in pre-application meetings, which I can discuss next in the next steps.
If I could ask one more clarifying question, just that under project capacity, if energy isn't pertinent to that specific project, they don't necessarily access those 20 points related to energy.
Nope, there are points. You can get up to 20 points for an outdoor non-building project, and it lists in the criteria how you would meet that, how you would get up to those points.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now I'll talk about the next steps. So as you know, the final round for the Community Center Investment Program opens tomorrow. So tomorrow, we would hope that you've registered for our grants management system and use the instructions in our resource hub if you need them to get registered. And at that point, you'll be able to start your application. The final funding round for the Community Center Investment Program will close on November 30th at 4 o'clock. And this is a web-based grants management system. So we do encourage people to try to submit their application a couple hours in advance, just to ensure that you don't run into any technical challenges. Applications will be reviewed December through February, and the final award announcements and the contracting will begin in March 2024. We want to just re-review a few of the tools and resources that are available to you throughout the process. We work closely with potential applicants during this phase, which is the pre-application phase, to understand your needs, align those needs to our technical assistance and financing resources, understand other potential supports. So you may have gone through this these webinars and recognize that either because of timing or because of the type of project that your project is, that you don't necessarily align with the eligibility requirements of the community center program. We really hope that you'll look at some of the other programs that CDFA has available, including our tax credit program with soon applications, which are due in March, and upcoming webinars. And we'll be able to provide you in technical assistance appointments additional information about those resources. Across all our programs, we do provide that technical assistance. So in this program, pre-application meetings began yesterday on October 18th, and they'll run through November 3rd. In the webinar follow-up to Tuesday's webinar and the webinar follow-up that you'll receive today, you'll receive instructions on how to sign up for those technical assistance meetings, that pre-application meeting. Some of the things we'll talk about that the staff will really discuss with you in that technical assistance meeting and will help to determine whether you really align to this funding source or whether we should work with you to identify another funding source that better meets your project, are will your construction start within 6 months? So we really want to understand how your pre-construction activities are going and whether that aligns to this program requirement. We'll also talk to you about your funding and whether you have the other funds necessary to complete the project and once you apply for these community center funds, and whether you have that 15% match requirement. If you're ready to submit an application, if you thought through those questions, then we'd really encourage you again to schedule a pre-application meeting, instructions forthcoming, and we'll have those through November 3rd. You can find a lot of information both around the Community Center Investment Program and our other programs. We have pre-recordings of our workshops for the tax credit program, of the community development block grants, and many other resources on our resource hub. So we encourage you to look at that resource hub for information about the Community Center Investment Program as well as our other programs. I'll just re-review those key dates. They include the application being available starting tomorrow, the application being due on November 30th, the review that will happen between December and February, and the award notifications in early March. We're going to stay online now for a few minutes and hope to answer all the remaining questions.
Great, thanks, Katie. And I'll ask if folks answer the questions, if it's compliance related, I'll call for Chris, or it's energy related, I'll call for Scott, but some general questions here. Just kind of clarifying the what we consider is the authorized official. If we could just kind of dive into who that person should be, but also clarify that we're not looking for you to provide us any evidence of authorization that you should apply for the grant. We just want an authorized official to be a part of your grants management registration, and they are the ones that will need to sign off on that certification that your organization will be pursuing these resources. So Becky, I don't know if you want to kind of explain the authorized official again, but that would be great.
So thinking about the authorized official, like as Melissa said, who can sign off on your application, but also thinking about who can legally enter into a contract. So if you're a nonprofit, it could be your executive director, or maybe it's your board chair. If your town, it might be a member of your board of selectmen, or maybe your town administrator. I don't know if I'm misspeaking there, but if anyone else wants to chime in on that. But understanding different organizations and different applicants of different structures, but really it's up to your specific organization or municipality as to who has that legal right or ability to sign on behalf of your project. So I think that's what you need to think about. It's not up to us. Like Melissa said, we aren't approving them. We just need to have them in our grant management system, because that's who we will be contacting if you're awarded come March.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
A clarification on the grants management system. It does allow you to fill out the application in sections, but make sure that you're saving throughout that process so that you have hitting the save button often is encouraged, but also taking into account the character limits, which are listed in the application and program guide, and possibly thinking about drafting your application in a Word document that you then would use to kind of copy and paste into that grants management system. But definitely pay attention to the character limits that are listed in the app and program guide before doing that, because otherwise that copy paste job can be a little bit frustrating if the characters don't all fit. A question about match. So would DPW labor for site work be eligible as part of the match funding?
I think that I'm guessing Department of Public Works would be my guess, and I would think it would, because if a municipality has a reserve to cover cost of the project, or is using funds to pay for labor specific to the project, I would say that it would be considered match.
Great. And these are really good questions too to bring up in your pre-application meeting should you need further clarification on what might be considered match funds. And a question about the authorization form for access to the grants management system would be emailed to I believe Nate Olson, but I'll clarify that. That information will be readily accessible on the form. All right, we have a very specific question, which I think I'm going to ask that they have a pre-application meeting or reach out to us separately, just because that a very comprehensive but specific question coming up. Character limits do include spaces and punctuation, including if you enter and leave space at the end of a sentence. But hopefully there should be, we give you plenty of characters that shouldn't be an issue. How do we reach out for individual assistance meetings? You'll be receiving an email that will have instructions, including a link for you to be able to schedule pre-application meetings with CDFA staff. pausing for any additional questions that might come through. And again, as we talked about, this isn't your only opportunity to ask us questions. Those pre-app meetings are a great place to learn more about the program and explore some questions very specific to your proposed project, and get some additional details from CDFA staff related to your specific questions and projects. And seeing no open questions at this time, I think we'll close out today's webinar, but thank you so much for joining us. We understand it was a significant ask for you to be with us 2 days this week for quite some time. So really appreciate you all joining us today. And with that, we'll close the webinar.